I mean, the situation that's developed in and around the Kharkiv area is really interesting. So the Ukrainians appear to be able to make some advances in the area. Not a massive area, some 600 square kilometres. That's about 30 kilometres by 20 kilometres. But it's interesting that they're making advances rather than just defending against the Russians. And I think it tells us something about the way in which the balance of the war, and its kind of balance of the war, has gone. We've known for a while now that the Ukrainians have been developing a whole range of kind of drone technologies. Very largely to begin with, it was defensive drones, being able to attack what they call first-person view against individuals. But increasingly, they've been able to extend the ranges of those drones, and then now most recently have been able to do two things. One is very long-range drones, we can talk about those in a minute, but the other one, much more importantly, is what you might call medium-range drones, out to some 300 kilometres. And the point about those is they've been able to attack the Russians in the logistic depots, in their concentration areas, in their command and control centres. And this has made it very hard for the Russians to coordinate effectively, and the Ukrainians have then been able to exploit that on the tactical battlefield. Now, the really big question is whether they can go one stage further. Can they take some of these small local tactical successes and turn it into an operational level breakthrough, a significant breakthrough? Now, that is probably much harder for them, but it does show that the balance at the moment is turning in the favour of the Ukrainians. The Russians are trying to catch up. The Russians have massively ramped up their drone production, but at the moment, the advantage on the tactical battlefield is with the Ukrainians, and hence they've been able to achieve these local limited tactical successes. It's a significant development that they've been able to achieve these tactical breakthroughs, and I think on the local level they'll be able to do it wherever they really want to, up and down the front. The level of sophistication they've shown, both in terms of the technical element around the drones themselves, but also the way in which they've decentralised command and control. So that at relatively low levels, down to brigade level, normally a grouping about 3,000 to 5,000 people, they've got good local information. They've also got the ability to select and acquire their own weapon systems and equipment, which is a very low level of kind of delegated responsibility compared, for example, to what happens in the UK, where everything is controlled and directed at a very, very high level. And I think this is enormously to the advantage of the Ukrainians, particularly dealing with the Russians. The Russians are very much top-down, orders-led, and don't really allow much in the way of initiative. And the Ukrainians will be able to exploit that. So, I mean, I think they'll be able to achieve a whole series of tactical successes, almost wherever they feel like it, along the battlefield. But they'll still have this challenge, and that's the challenge of sort of sheer numbers and the size of the problem, whether they can really achieve a major operational breakthrough. Let's not forget, while we can celebrate all the successes that the Ukrainians have got, that Russia still occupies about 20% of Ukraine. A lot of the things they took in the first year or so of the war, they're still holding on to. And trying to recover those, I think, will be a major effort. And I think it's probably currently beyond the Ukrainians' capability so to do, however much we might desire it ourselves. Crimea is really interesting because the Crimea has got two importances. One, it was the major base for the Russian Navy in the Black Sea. And it's also an area where the majority of the population were effectively Russian-speaking. It was only given to Ukraine in the 1950s, but its early loss in 2014 as part of Putin's first defence of Ukraine has hurt them really badly. Now, what the Ukrainians have now been able to do, though, is attack some of the linkages, particularly the Kerch Bridge, the so-called Unity Bridge that runs between the Russian mainland and Ukraine. And this is making it very difficult for the Russians to hold on to it. What they've also been able to force to do is move their fleet. A lot of their kind of heavy equipment, logistics, and their airfields out of Crimea had to move it further east, which means that it's harder then for them to reinforce and support Russian efforts, which are to the west of that at the time. So the way in which they've been able to achieve some impact on Crimea is important. It also has a symbolic importance because of the kind of emphasis that Putin put on it. You may recall that Putin, when the Unity Bridge, so-called Unity Bridge, was open, he drove the first truck over it himself in order to kind of make that point. And here we have now the Ukrainians able to cut that bridge and stop the traffic on it relatively at will. They can't necessarily completely destroy it, but they can actually show how limited the ability of the Russians are to hold on to what they saw as a really important symbolic element of their attacks. I think that the striking that bridge is a regular thing for the Ukrainians because it is so important. It is so symbolic. It's one of those things, a bit like Red Square in the Kremlin, that's really key to their sense of themselves. And you recall it's only last month that effectively Putin had to either threaten or get permission from President Zelensky to hold the May Day parades on May the 9th in the Kremlin. Zelensky rather cheekily gave Putin permission to hold the parade, but what the Russians had to do was take all the armour and all the rockets and everything else off that parade. It was a parade of people only. That's the first time it's happened in more than 20 odd years. And I think it shows you, again, the kind of balance has switched, and that the Ukrainians can, if they will, they can strike pretty well anywhere they like, certainly within European Russia and even into Asiatic Russia as well. And I think the striking against the bridge on that bridge that runs from other parts of Russia through to Crimea would be very much high on the priority of the Ukrainians in the future. I think if they could cut it and destroy it completely, they'd be delighted so to do, but it is a fairly major structure and that may not be technically possible. I mean, Putin himself, I think, is now, not just in terms of his role as president, but he's now personally worried by the increasing ability of Ukraine to strike whenever he likes throughout Russia itself. We saw that, and we mentioned earlier, what's happened with the May Day parade, the way in which that was scaled down. President Putin also looked at what happened to Venezuela, where President Maduro was removed in a special forces operation, and of course during the war between Iran and Israel and America, the way in which in the first night of that war, the Ayatollah and a significant element of the leadership of Iran was removed in a significant decapitation strike. So Putin's looking at this and thinking this could happen to me, and of course he's quite right, because Ukrainians throughout have shown a remarkable ability, technological ability, innovation, creativity in the way in which they'll be able to attack Russia. And so he's looking at this, and we've seen it in some of the ways he's carrying on. We've heard stories, which we report, I think, in the Sun, that he's called for his daughters to basically to live with him in one of the palaces in near the Crimea. We know that the number of anti-aircraft systems around that particular palace has this year gone up from 7 anti-aircraft systems, which is quite a lot, to some 27 systems from there. He's completely paranoid about the use of CCTV, because the CCTV coverage was the way in which the Israelis were able to target the Ayatollah and his henchmen in Iran. And so the extent of paranoia within Putin, which was always there beneath the surface, must be increased. And he knows strategically his country is starting to suffer as well. And at some point, some of the people who support Putin, have supported Putin in the past, might come to the conclusion that their interests are better off with a different leader in charge. Putin knows this, and it's one of the things I think that worries him. So not just external strikes from Ukraine, but also whether there's an internal coup that sees him removed. One of the challenges that Putin has got is with his economy. Now, a couple of years ago, he changed it over into a war economy. And this means that effectively some 8% of his GDP is now spent on defence and security, and indeed other such things as well. So including some of the intelligence apparatus and things that they have. The real challenge for that is that because of sanctions, however limited they are and in terms of their effect, they are having an effect, and the general economy is starting to collapse. Now that has been portrayed to President Putin, and he understands that. But it's a question of what can he do about it in the short to medium term. But he's effectively turned his country into kind of militarized state, and the consequences, particularly for the ordinary people, are high. Some of that's been hidden, so he's been paying lots of money to soldiers or to soldiers' families when soldiers are being killed. But the fundamental economy for Russia is starting to be threatened now by this continued war. There is an amelioration, partial amelioration, in terms of the lifting of sanctions because of the war in the Gulf, which is bringing money back into the exchequer, but it's probably not enough to pay for the costs of the war. At some point, that is going to affect how he looks and conducts the war. He shows no sign immediately of changing, but I think that will be a factor going forward, particularly this year and next year. Unfortunately, when it comes to what you might call economic warfare, the effects tend to be longer term rather than short term.